As he said, this is week 2 of the series Story of My Life. My name is JC. So tonight I'm just going to be telling you a story about my life and a few points that I want you to guys take away from it. And if my computer will stay on, that'd be great. So I'm just going to jump right in and tell you a little bit something about stories. So before I tell you my story, I want you to realize the power that stories have before you even get into a real life story. If you think about stories are told through every medium that we have today. Musicians write songs and raps about them. You have filmmakers who recreate them. You have books that describe them. You have TV series that are built around them. And then you have Snapchat for those of you like me who can't do anything creative and tell them. So, this is how information was passed on from generation to generation. Kids fell asleep listening to them. They were told around campfires. And they were also remembered for a lifetime. Stories have power. They pull at your heart. They get your adrenaline pumping. They set your mind spinning. They can transport you from Earth to another galaxy. Think of all the movies and all the music that you really seem to connect with. Some of the movies that really get at you, like that song that you have on repeat because you're like, man, this really gets me. Like, this is my song right now. You know, why is it that that's your song? Why is it that your movie that really gets your heart going? And you know what that is? It's just because it's a real life thing. We go through real life struggles and we go through real life events that we can all connect with at different points in time. So like imagine your favorite real life, like told after a real story, like movie. So like when I think of this, like I think of Miracle. Anyone know what the movie Miracle is about? Yeah, like 1980 USA. Hockey team goes and beats the Soviet Union because they're terrible. Complete underdog story. They come back, win the gold medal, and it's crazy, right? What? No, I don't know.
What's his name?
No. So Miracle is like my favorite. Like Miracle is my favorite real life story. It's something that like when you're watching the whole time, I'm cheering for like the team every time I watch it behind my computer quietly because my roommate would think I'm crazy if I was sitting there like clapping and going crazy. If I know who wins every game and how the story goes. But every time you watch it, it's still pulling at you. You still want to root for them. You know what? Each and every one of you possesses a true, real-life, amazing story. And each one of your stories is amazing because God's writing it. And God's the greatest writer of all time. The best evidence of this is if you look at everyone in this room, they all have a story that could be really similar, but no one's is going to be the same. Think about it. There's 7 billion people on this planet. Everyone can have a similar story, but there's not going to be 2 that are exactly the same. Think of all those possibilities, all those changes, everything that has to unfold to make sure that everyone's story is different. That's a good writer. That's God. That's what he does with each and every one of you. So, what I want to touch on today is why don't we tell stories? We do, but why don't they have meaning? Every day, you probably tell stories to your mom and dad. You tell them what happened during the day. You tell your friends a funny story of how your friend tripped going onto the bus in front of his crush. Like, you tell stories every day. So why don't we tell stories that have eternal significance? Why don't we tell stories that mean something? I mean, we tell one every day, so why can't we actually have one that means something? As a Christ follower, our story is the most powerful tool that God has given us outside of the Bible. Is the best way to show people who God is, what God has done in our life, and how much he loves us. Because of this, our stories are meant to be told. Stories are the perfect way to show people what God has done for you and who he is, because stories are easy and they're not like invasive. You're not hitting someone with the Bible saying, listen to me. So, like I said, I'm going to tell you my story today. I want to just briefly hit on three identity crises that I experienced through my life and that led me to placing my identity in Christ. But first, I'd like to hit on my family so you guys have a little idea of who I am and where I come from. So if you could take a look on your right, on right below me, that's my little sister Kinsey. She just graduated high school, so she's 18. And the sister right next to her, that's Riley. She's going into her sophomore year of high school. So they're like your guys' age. And it's kind of fun when I'm around because it reminds me of being around my siblings, and it's a lot of fun. That's my mom and my dad. They both work a little too hard, but they've taught me my work ethic, and they've taught me pretty much everything I know. Now, my mom's the only Christian in my family outside of me, So I didn't really grow up in a Christian household, but I grew up in a household that was built on morals. If you do the right thing, you'll be a good kid. So continuing as I'm growing up, I want to transition into my life and my identities that continue to fail. Growing up, I loved baseball. Baseball was my first love. It's just great. There's so many life parallels of baseball that I just not even get started on. But baseball was my life. I was super competitive. I still am. I'm just better at hiding it now. It's not really, it's a little frowned upon when you're yelling at a sixth grader because they're out, and yeah, you just can't do it. So I'm still competitive, but at the time, baseball was my life, and because baseball was my life, I made it my identity. And the one thing about making sports your identity is how you do and how your day is directly correlated. So if you have a bad game or a bad practice, the rest of your day is terrible. Now for me, I took it to the extreme where I was that one kid who cried after every strikeout because I put so much stress on myself and so much pressure that I had to be the best and I had to do well. And so as I grew up and went through middle school, in middle school I was a small kid, but I was playing travel baseball. I was doing pretty well. And I get to high school. Your freshman year, you're the low man on the totem pole and you want to make a name for yourself. I walk into baseball tryouts. I missed the first day because I didn't have my paperwork, so I was kind of upset and angry at myself. Get through 3 more cuts. I get narrowed down between 100. It was 150 people tried out. I made it down to the last 30 for the JV team. And the coach is bringing us everyone into their office one at a time. And I'm sitting outside the office. I'm going next. My heart's racing. This is my life. What happens if he says I'm cut? Well, I walk in. He looks at me, doesn't say, hi, how are you, nothing. He says, come back with a growth spurt. So I got cut because I was too small. And in case you don't know, if you're a small guy, getting called small doesn't really help you and your self-esteem at all, actually. So to point this out, Derek was wonderful to be my example. I was Derek's size as a freshman going into high school. You can stand up if you want. So there's hope. I was 5'4" and 120 pounds. I was just a little tiny kid trying to play high school sports, and it didn't work. So you can sit down now. Thanks for standing up. So it was hard. It was hard on me, and I lost my identity. And what happens when you lose your identity after having an identity for so long? You don't know how to be yourself. You don't know who you are. So my next logical step was, what's my next identity? What am I going to devote my life to next? And for me, I was a part of ROTC because all my friends were a part. And if you don't know what ROTC is, it's just like a high school military program to kind of show you what life in the military is like. So if you like it, you can join the military afterwards. And if not, you don't have to be in the military. So I enjoyed it, and my friends were all in it, so I was doing it to fit in. And I saw this as my next opportunity to be the best at something. And of course, because I'm competitive, I set my goals and my sights on being the top guy. And the top guy, his position or his title was the battalion commander. So senior year rolls around, I get awarded the position. I'm super happy because I finally, you reach your goal and you want to be excited. And after about a month, I was like, this is boring. There's nothing left for me to get. I reached my goal, what's next? There wasn't anything next in high school. And when I was coming to this realization where I had this identity that I was wrapped into and I didn't even like. I didn't like being this guy because I had nothing else to aspire to be. And at the same time, my friends are getting super negative. They're in that senior cocky spirit where they're like, we're too good for everyone, and they just kind of tear everyone down. And it was starting to change who I was. I started becoming this negative person. I realized it, and I hated it. So as senior year rolls on, I start to realize my friends are terrible. So I do what every logical high school student would do and ditch your friends. So I went from a ton of friends who were super negative to no friends very quickly. And I kind of liked it for a week. And then once again, I had no friends. And I'm like, well, this is kind of boring. So my next logical step was I'm going to go hang out with my friends that I hung out with in middle school. Now, something I learned about this was your friends in middle school are probably the truest friends you'll ever make, because if they can handle you through that awkward stage in middle school, they can handle you at pretty much every other stage of your life. Hands down. They know you at your absolute worst when you're in 7th grade and you have an acne beard and everything's just going crazy. If they can handle you there, they can handle you when you're doing good and as a senior, right? What I didn't realize is that they actually knew who I was because they were helping me figure out who I was in middle school. They helped me figure out what my personality was, what my niche was. So when I was a senior and I was trying to be everything that I wasn't, they kept yelling at me and telling me that's not who I am. I kind of got a little ticked a few times, but they were real and they knew who I was because I grew up in middle school with them. So as senior year goes on, as most of you have either gone through or are beginning to realize, you start to look for schools. So as my time as ROTC was winding down, my senior year was winding down, that identity was closing in on me and I knew I had to find a new one. So because I was so involved in the ROTC, my next goal was the next logical step, at least for me, was to be a fighter pilot. So I wanted to be a naval aviator. I wanted to be Tom Cruise, flying in Top Gun, shooting down all the bogeys. Hopefully Goose doesn't die on me, a whole bunch of stuff like that. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be seen as the cool guy. But in high school, my grades sucked because all my attention was in ROTC. So I was lucky enough to get into this school where I started studying aerospace engineering. Aerospace engineering is basically you design planes and they fly. So I was going through aerospace engineering, and about halfway through my semester, I start to look around and I'm like, I am not like any other people here. One, everyone in my hall had a cumulative GPA of over a 4.0. I barely graduated high school with a 2.9. I was out of the, I couldn't handle it. There's a guy on my hall who got a full ride scholarship to MIT, which is the Harvard of technology, and he chose to go to my school. So I'm sitting there I am a horrible human being. Also walking to class, college, you walk outside the classrooms and you're all over the place on campus for school and whatnot. I'm walking down sidewalks and I'm getting hit, almost hit by baseballs and footballs. You look at people are tossing a football just to pass time, and the football is tumbling through the air. If you know anything about football, footballs don't tumble; they spiral. Hopefully, tennis balls are flying everywhere, volleyballs are going nowhere near the court. And I'm just wondering what the heck is wrong with these people. I'm honestly if I had to guess, I think 90% of them didn't play any sports past Little League, and that was generous. I couldn't walk to class without almost getting hit by a ball almost every day, and it was really driving me crazy. So there's this one final step is all right, I am not meant to be here. This is not my place. So fortunately, I had been to Liberty a few times, went to some cool concerts. They're super cheap. If you ever want to go to Liberty for a concert, it's $15 compared to a $50 ticket. So as I saw this other identity in my academics and this identity in being a naval aviator or a fighter pilot dwindling down, my opportunity was shutting on me. I was searching yet again for another identity. I didn't know what I was going to be this time because I had nothing left to fall back on. I didn't have a school to fall back on to become, the school spirit guy or whatever, the guy that goes every basketball game and cheers like crazy. I didn't have anything. I didn't know who I was going to be. I didn't know what I was going to do because I wasn't going to do engineering again. That was for sure. That was boring. What am I supposed to do with my life? So I transferred to Liberty, and I get there. And I start to realize all these things. I begin to be taught these things that I never thought I didn't know. When I got there, I realized that Christianity is more than just being a good kid. I had grown up my whole life thinking I was a Christian because my mom was a Christian. I read the little picture Bible, 3 times a year or something, and I never got in trouble. I was a perfect kid growing up. So I thought I was a Christian. Come to find out, that's not what being a Christian is about. I heard the gospel completely for the first time in my life when I walked into school that day. Classes were begun and ended with prayer, and we talked about God and we talked about all sorts of religion stuff all the time. It was something that was completely new to me. I had never experienced this before. So about 2 weeks into this, I start to really ask some questions. I start to really develop a curiosity about Christianity, a curiosity about God, and a curiosity about what I actually believed. And the weird thing to me is I didn't really have that many friends. I went a solid month without any friends. So I had no one to talk to. I had no one to ask questions to, and I wasn't going to be the teacher pet in every class asking all the questions. That wasn't going to be me. So I kept coming up with these questions. I would think about them in my head. I think this doesn't make sense. I need to figure out, what does this mean? What does this mean? Why don't I do this? Why do I do this? But every class and every speech and everything that I went to from day one to about 3 weeks into the semester was an answer to that question. So it would go maybe a few seconds, a few minutes, even a few hours. But I wouldn't end the day without having my last question answered. And it was something that was really crazy for me. And for a while, I was like, dude, this is beyond this is beyond a coincidence. Like, these circumstances just don't happen. So I began to wonder, like, who's doing this? Like, who knows what I'm thinking? It was kind of weird because I'm sitting in class and these answers keep getting, like, answered. Or these questions keep getting answered. I'm like, bro, what's going on? Like, who's in my head right now? Like, that's not fun. Like, you're sitting there like, someone's reading my mind right now and I have no idea who it is. But this is freaky. So God began to pull out my heart. He started beginning to pull me towards him. I started asking questions like, why don't I believe in him? Like, why am I not a Christian? Why don't I not believe this? And the one answer that I kept coming up with is I didn't want to trust him with my plans. Now, mind you, this whole time I thought my plans were going wonderfully well. In case you haven't noticed, I've lost 3 identities and 3 things I was good at, and they never carried out. And after a while, I learned about the story of Joseph in Genesis. And for those of you that don't know the story of Joseph, it's about this guy's son, who was the son of many. He was the favorite son. He had all the things laid out for him. He was the one that his dad gave him everything. And because of this, his brothers hated him, so he sold him into slavery. And after circumstance after circumstance, event after event, he ended up way farther into slavery than anyone would have ever expected. But then the unexpected happens. He tells a dream, or he hears a dream, and he predicts the dream for Pharaoh, and he becomes second in charge of Egypt. Now, this kid went from the favorite of the family to the second favorite of all of Egypt. And that's something that no one in his family, no one even near him would have guessed that could have been possible. And I saw that, and I was thinking, my plans haven't really worked out. And I thought I had it all figured out. So I figured if I didn't know what was going on, I figured God probably does. So on January 23rd, 2013, is when I gave my life to Christ. And it was after I realized that I could place my confidence in him for figuring out my story and completing my story. Because after all, he was the one that was writing my story from the beginning. So my story is about different identity and having identity crises. And I don't know what your story is, but you need to think about it. If you've given your life to Christ, why don't you tell it? If you haven't given your life to Christ, what is it that's keeping you from it? I want to leave you with this one question, this one demand, and it's to share your story. You never know who's going to be affected by your story. Even if you're not a follower of Christ, your story can make an impact on others. But if you are a follower of Christ, your story carries more weight. One of my favorite songs is written by my favorite rapper, NF, at this time. His song is Therapy Session. I know some of you boys probably know it. If you get it up on the screen, here's the verse. I'm not going to rap it because I'm white and I can't rap. So throwing that out there. This is what it says. It says, yeah, I got to say, like a month ago, I was talking to fans, and one of them pulled me aside and said, we never met, but I swear that you know who I am. I've been through a lot. I don't know how to express it to people. Don't think that I can, but I got that Mansion CD on rotation. That's real for me, Nate. You do not understand. It's crazy for me. Kids hit me up. They slit in their wrists on the daily. This music is more than you think. Now, his music is touching people that haven't been touched before because he's going into the dark side of his life. He's telling the bad stories of his life. He's not only telling what's the good. He's not saying that he's making money selling CDs like he is. He's telling stories about his life and what went bad. Now, NF, his mom died because of a prescription drug overdose. He was abused as a kid. He has every right in the world to hide these things from everyone around him. But instead, he writes his music to say what's going on and what he went through. This whole song is talking about how his music is a therapy for him, but as well as a therapy for other people. Because of his music, he's able to reach out to people who haven't been reached out to, and they're able to have confidence in knowing that they're not the only ones going through these issues. A lot of people don't talk about their struggles, and a lot of people don't like to mention that they're doing anything less than perfect. Think about your favorite underdog story. Think about when you're watching, like, Remember the Titans or another real-life story with a huge underdog that's not supposed to win. Think of how much you love that underdog compared to that team that they have to beat. If you think about it, you actually hate the team they have to beat. Why do you hate that team so much? You look at the underdog, you see how they have real-life issues, they have difficulties to get through, and you're pushing for them to get through those difficulties because subconsciously you're thinking that you have difficulties and you have issues that you need to push through. And when you look at people that seem to have their life together, you see like this team that has no problem just going undefeated, you hate them because they have it all together. You think that it's all perfect. Now, when you tell your stories, it's like that. You can't just tell your perfect story because no one's story is perfect. Now, some of you guys don't have a story like NF where your mom OD'd or you were abused as a kid. Some of you have a story like me where I was just a normal kid that just thought he was doing good. Each one of us has a purpose for our story. Our story reaches different people and exposes other people to God's love. So if you have a crazy story, it's great. Your crazy story is going to reach people that are going through crazy life. If you have a mundane, simple, perfect childhood type event, or you grew up in a Christian home, your story is just as valuable because guess what? There's others out there like you. Like I said, we all have similar stories. We can all relate to each other. So, why don't we share our stories? I'm going to end with this Bible verse. It's 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 through 8. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. So do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord or me, his prisoner. Rather, join me in suffering for the gospel and the power of God. Look, the Holy Spirit's there to comfort us and give us the strength and the character traits to allow us to tell others about our story and his. So we shouldn't be afraid, and we should make sure that we're telling our stories to as many people as possible. Because guess what? Stories are easy. They flow off the tongue. They're easy to tell. And guess what? It's your own. You can't get your own story wrong. Literally, you can't forget it. It's happened in your life from the time you were born to who you are now. Unless you have a concussion like Parker and knock yourself out for 4 days, and then you might not be able to remember those days, but you remember your story. So your story matters. Share your story because your story matters. And if that's all you're going to remember today, remember that. Each and every one of your stories matter, and you need to share it. Thank you, guys.